My name is Allison. I am 32 years old and I am a captain in the United States Space Force serving as a tactical orbital analyst. But to my own flesh and blood, I am apparently a ghost they would rather not see at the dinner table. They say that blood is thicker than water, but after 3 combat deployments to some of the most desolate corners of the globe, I have realized that blood is also much easier to spill and colder than the liquid nitrogen we use to cool satellite sensors. I am sitting in my cubicle at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs, a room that smells like ozone, burnt Colombian roast coffee from a communal Keurig, and the dusty heat of a Honeywell HE200W space heater that is currently struggling against the sub-zero December wind rattling the reinforced windows. The fluorescent lights overhead hum with a persistent headache-inducing frequency that mimics the ringing in my ears I've carried since a mortar went off too close to my transport in 2019. I just returned from a 9-month stint in a high-intensity operational zone, 9 months of sand in my teeth, sleeping in a rack that smelled like diesel, and counting down every single second until I could taste my mother's roast beef and hear the chaotic laughter of a family Christmas. But then the notification pinged on my dual-monitor setup, cutting through the silence of the nearly empty office like a jagged blade. The email is from my younger sister, Rebecca, the golden child who spent the last 9 months picking out Faro and ball paint swatches for her new suburban colonial while I was monitoring ballistic trajectories. There is no greeting. No dear Allison, no hey big sis, not even a cold hello. The body of the email is exactly 21 words of calculated, surgical rejection that read, "We want a quiet Christmas, just immediate family. Please don't come. We have already reached capacity at the table this year." The screen glare reflects off my silver captain's bars, making the words dance in a cruel, mocking jitter. I am 45 minutes away from their front door. I drove my 2024 Lunar Rock Toyota Tundra through a blizzard to get back to this base, thinking I was heading toward a sanctuary, only to find out I have been classified as an outsider. Immediate family. The phrase feels like a physical blow to my solar plexus, sharper than any G-force I felt during flight training. I am the daughter who sent half her paycheck home for 4 years to help pay off the predatory interest rates on the family's consolidated debt, yet I am not immediate enough for a seat at a table I helped keep from being repossessed. I stare at the digital clock in the corner of my taskbar. 16:48. Outside, the sun is already dipping behind Pikes Peak, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the tarmac where rows of expensive government hardware sit shivering in the frost. I think about the 14-ounce ribeye I was going to buy for the family dinner, the $240 bottle of Macallan 18 I have tucked away in my trunk as a gift for a father who apparently didn't even care enough to send the email himself. Now I am just a woman in a stiff OCP uniform, surrounded by secure filing cabinets and the lonely glow of a monitor, realizing that while I was defending a country, I lost my place in a home. My fingers hover over the mechanical keyboard. The Cherry MX Brown switches silent as I contemplate the sheer audacity of being told I am a guest who has been uninvited from my own life. I wonder where you are watching this from right now and what time it is for you, because for me, it is the exact moment I realized that being a hero abroad means absolutely nothing if you are a villain at home for simply existing. I can hear the wind howling through the base's perimeter fence, a low, mourning sound that matches the hollow ache in my chest as I realize I am about to spend the most expensive holiday of the year in a cramped studio apartment eating a pre-packaged emery because my sister decided I didn't fit the aesthetic of her perfect, quiet Christmas. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand why 21 words could break a woman who survived a war zone, you have to understand the years of silence that built this wall. The 21 words on my screen are not just a rejection. They are a declaration of a class war I never asked to fight, a sharp reminder of the vast, shimmering chasm that separates my life from my sister's carefully curated performance. I sit in my ergonomic office chair, the black mesh straining against my back, and I think about my bank account versus hers. As a Space Force captain with over 10 years of service, my base pay sits at exactly $7,100 a month, a steady, honest sum that has allowed my husband Dan and me to build a life of quiet stability. Dan is a former Marine who now works as a civilian contractor at the base, and together we live in a modest 1,200 square foot rancher in a neighborhood where the lawns are neat but the houses are 40 years old. We drive a 2018 quicksand-colored Toyota Tacoma with 85,000 miles on the odometer and a slight rattle in the tailgate that we refuse to fix because the truck is paid off and it gets us where we need to go through the Colorado snow. Our lives are built on spreadsheets, calculated risks, and the understanding that every dollar has a purpose. A stark contrast to the hollowed-out opulence of Rebecca's world 3 states away in Vermont. My sister lives in an $850,000 suburban mansion that sits on a manicured 3-acre lot, a house with soaring ceilings and a mortgage that likely keeps her awake at night, though she would never admit it. While I am dressed in OCPs that smell like laundry starch and industrial floor wax, Rebecca is likely draped in a $400 cashmere lounge set, obsessing over her aesthetic Christmas theme, which this year, according to her Instagram, is Victorian winter solstice. She spends money like it is an infinite resource, dropping $200 on individual hand-blown glass ornaments from a boutique in Burlington while her husband, Mark, plays the role of a high-powered consultant. In reality, Mark's firm is a sinking ship, a boutique consultancy that hasn't landed a major contract in 18 months, yet they continue to maintain the facade of the New England elite. Their daughter, my niece Clara, attends a prestigious private academy where the tuition is exactly $28,400 a year, a staggering sum for a child who is only in the 3rd grade. But I know the truth because our mother can't keep a secret when she's had 2 glasses of Chardonnay. Those tuition fees are currently 3 months past due, and the school has already sent 2 formal warnings to their designer-shingled front door. It is a sickening irony that the woman who is uninviting me for the sake of a quiet family Christmas is the same woman who owes the electric company $560.42 for the heating bill on a house she can't afford to warm. I see the photos she posts of her perfectly flocked tree and her designer gift wrapping, and I know that behind the lens, the credit card debt is piling up like a snowdrift in a nor'easter. While Dan and I are planning our retirement and contributing to our TSPs, Rebecca is drowning in a sea of luxury she hasn't earned, yet I am the one who is deemed not immediate enough to witness the charade. She wants a quiet Christmas because she cannot risk me looking too closely at the cracks in the plaster or the way Mark flinches when the phone rings. She wants the aesthetic of a perfect life without the presence of a sister who remembers what it was like when we shared a bedroom and a single set of colored pencils. I am the reality she is trying to delete, the sibling whose life is measured in service and sacrifice rather than the price tag of a centerpiece. As I sit here in the dim light of the base, the hum of the space heater feels more honest than anything in that $850,000 mansion, and the bitterness in my throat tastes like the copper of a penny, cheap and metallic and impossible to swallow. I am the one with the steady paycheck and the clear conscience, but in Rebecca's world, I am just an eyesore that doesn't fit her $200 ornament collection. This cold 21-word email is not a sudden fracture but the final surgical cut in a years-long process of my sister phasing me out of our family's history like an unwanted background character in a high-budget film. I remember 3 years ago when I returned from a TDY in Ramstein, Germany, and I brought back 3 authentic hand-carved Erzgebirge nutcrackers, each one costing me nearly €350 and representing hours of craftsmanship by a master woodworker named Klaus. I watched Rebecca's face tighten as she unwrapped them, her eyes darting not to the intricate detail of the painted uniforms but to the way the traditional deep reds and forest greens looked against her minimalist, monochromatic living room. By the time the sun had set on Christmas Eve, those nutcrackers, which I had carefully padded in my tactical gear for a 10-hour flight, were shoved into a damp cardboard box in her unheated garage because she claimed they clashed with her curated rose gold and champagne glitter theme. It was a humiliation that cost me more than money. It was the realization that my experiences, my travels, and my very presence were merely inconveniences to her aesthetic perfection. Now the betrayal has reached its logical, cruel conclusion as I sit here at my desk at Peterson Space Force Base, staring at the clinical white background of my Outlook inbox. My mother, who lacks the tactical discipline to keep a secret, let it slip during our last encrypted WhatsApp call that Rebecca is under severe financial stress, with a looming 30-day notice from her mortgage lender on that $850,000 Vermont estate. Instead of picking up the phone and asking her older sister for a loan or even just an honest conversation, Rebecca has chosen the coward's move of total erasure. She would rather sever our sisterhood than admit that she cannot afford the $300 organic heritage turkey or the 4 cases of Veuve Clicquot she usually flaunts to maintain her status among the PTA elite. By sending this cold, formal email, she isn't just asking for a quiet Christmas. She is building a wall of silence to hide the fact that her life is a house of cards currently being buffeted by the winds of insolvency. She thinks that by cutting me out she can prevent me from seeing the empty cupboards behind the designer cabinet doors or noticing that the thermostat is set to a shivering 62 degrees to save on the heating oil bill. The cowardice of using an email, a medium usually reserved for base-wide directives or logistical updates, to uninvite her only sister from a holiday is a sting that no amount of military stoicism can dull. She didn't even have the courage to hear the tremor in my voice or the silence that would have followed her words on a phone call. She wanted a clean, digital execution where she could hit send and return to her world of Pinterest boards and overdue credit card statements without having to face the reality of my pain. I am a captain in the Space Force, a woman trained to handle orbital collisions and high-stakes pressure, but I find myself defeated by the sheer pettiness of a woman who values a rose-gold aesthetic more than the person who has spent a decade protecting her right to live in that superficial bubble. I realize now that my exclusion isn't about her wanting peace. It is about her fear of being seen for what she truly is, a woman drowning in debt who would rather lose her family than lose her pride. The 21 words on my screen are a funeral notice for a relationship I thought was worth fighting for, and as the space heater clicks off, leaving me in the chilling silence of the office, I finally understand that some bridges aren't worth the fuel it takes to cross them. I walk out of the sterile silence of the office at Peterson Space Force Base, the heavy security door clicking shut with a finality that echoes through the empty corridor, and I step into a wall of biting Colorado air that feels cleaner than anything I have breathed all day. The temperature on my dashboard reads exactly 22 degrees Fahrenheit as I climb into the driver's seat of my 2018 Quicksand Toyota Tacoma, the cold leather of the steering wheel stinging my palms before the heater can even begin to struggle against the frost. I sit there for a long moment watching the Colorado sunset bleed across the horizon in jagged streaks of bruised violet and burning orange, the light hitting my cracked windshield at an angle that illuminates every speck of dust and every mile I have traveled to get back to a family that has effectively locked their doors. I have spent my entire adult life holding the line, whether it was monitoring orbital debris in a dark room or surviving the heat of a desert deployment, always convincing myself that my service was a shield for the people I loved back home. But as the truck's engine rumbles to life, a steady and reliable mechanical heart, I realize with a sickening clarity that I have been guarding a front line for a family that views me as a hostile intruder rather than a protector. I reach into the glove box, pushing aside my registration and a stray tactical flashlight, and pull out a single crumpled white paper napkin from a Chipotle I visited 3 weeks ago. My hand is steady as I click my black G2 Pilot pen and begin to calculate the literal cost of a rejection that Rebecca thought was free of charge. I scribble the numbers in neat, disciplined block letters. Gas for the round trip to Vermont in this V6 engine, approximately $450. A decent hotel in Burlington because I wouldn't be allowed to stay in her guest room anyway, $600. The sheer psychological weight of feeling like a nuisance in the house where I grew up, priceless. I stare at the napkin, the ink bleeding slightly into the cheap fiber, and I see the absurdity of my own devotion laid bare in black and white. For years, I have been the one willing to pay any price, to bridge any distance, and to endure any slight just to maintain the illusion of a cohesive family unit, while Rebecca has been charging me interest on my own affection. I am a captain in the United States Space Force, a woman who coordinates million-dollar assets in the silent vacuum of space, and I am currently sitting in a parking lot crying over a woman who values the aesthetic of a dinner table over the sister who helped pay for it. I decide right then, as the last sliver of the sun disappears behind the peaks and the cabin of my truck finally begins to warm to a comfortable 72 degrees, that I am finished begging for a seat at a table where I am viewed as a decorative afterthought. I am done apologizing for my presence, done hiding my successes so they don't overshadow Rebecca's fragile ego, and done being the backup plan for a family that only calls when the bank account is empty. If I am not immediate enough for their Christmas, then they are no longer significant enough for my sacrifice. I put the truck into gear, the tires crunching over the frozen slush of the parking lot, and I feel a strange, terrifying lightness spreading through my chest. I am not going to Vermont, and I am not going to spend another second wondering why I wasn't invited to a house of cards that is already blowing over in the wind. I am going to drive back to my modest 1,200 square foot rancher. I am going to pour that $240 bottle of Macallan for my husband Dan, and I am going to start building my own table where the only requirement for entry is genuine love and a shred of basic human decency. Family isn't just about the blood you share. It is about who stands beside you when the world goes dark. And as I pull out of the base gates, I realize I've been looking for home in all the wrong coordinates. My name is Allison, and while my sister Rebecca is busy arranging $200 glass ornaments in a house she cannot afford, I have decided to execute a logistical operation that would make a 4-star general nod in approval. If I am not immediate family enough for a seat at her folding table in Vermont, then I will simply build a table so grand that the gravitational pull of our shared history shifts entirely toward me. Dan and I sit in our modest rancher, the glow of our laptops illuminating the living room as we officially deploy our resources with the precision of a tactical strike. We are not wasting a single cent on lawyers or mediation to beg for an invitation. Instead, we have contacted a high-end property manager in Aspen, Colorado, and secured a $4,200 luxury mountain villa for 4 nights. This isn't just a rental. It is a 5-bedroom timber frame masterpiece with a floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace, a heated wraparound deck, and a view of the maroon bells that looks like a high-definition postcard. While Rebecca is shivering in 62-degree silence to save on heating oil, Dan and I are signing a contract for a sanctuary where the heated floors are set to a constant 74 degrees and the air smells like expensive cedar and wood smoke. I open my encrypted military contact list, scrolling past the names of blood relatives who have gone silent, and I begin calling my true unit, the people who actually held the line with me when the world was literally on fire. I am not calling for sympathy. I am calling for an assembly of the forgotten. I reach out to 15 people. Soldiers from my last deployment who have no place to go this year, 2 neighbors who lost their spouses in the last 12 months and dread the silence of an empty house, and 3 old friends from flight school who understand that loyalty is a verb, not a noun. This is not a dinner. It is a mobilization of the resilient. I track every single RSVP on a professional logistics spreadsheet, the same kind I use to coordinate satellite window launches, and I allocate a $2,500 catering budget from the savings I've meticulously managed while Rebecca was chasing her rose gold fantasies. I have already placed the order with a local gourmet chef for a dry-aged prime rib roast, a selection of artisanal cheeses from the Roaring Fork Valley, and 12 bottles of vintage 2018 Silver Oak Cabernet Sauvignon that cost more than Rebecca's entire monthly grocery budget. There is a cold, calculated satisfaction in seeing the spreadsheet cells turn green as my real family confirms their attendance. I am building a holiday based on merit and mutual respect rather than the obligation of a shared surname. Every time I type a name into the guest list, I feel the weight of Rebecca's 21-word email lifting off my shoulders, replaced by the solid reality of people who would actually pull me out of a burning cockpit. We are planning a feast that includes 4 different types of roasted root vegetables, a triple cream brie that retails for $45 a wheel, and a dessert spread that will be served on the heated deck under a blanket of Colorado stars. I am no longer the unwanted guest at a failing Vermont mansion. I am the commanding officer of a celebration that values substance over aesthetic. My sister wants a quiet Christmas to hide her shame, but I am choosing a loud, vibrant, and expensive Christmas to celebrate my survival. As Dan closes his laptop and pours me a glass of water, I realize that the $4,200 for the villa is the best investment I have ever made, because it is the price of my own dignity. I am done being a footnote in someone else's manufactured fairy tale. I am writing my own story now, and the guest list is full of heroes. On the evening of December 23rd, as the mountain air outside our Aspen villa drops to a crisp 15 degrees, I take a rare moment of stillness to check my phone, and there it is. Rebecca has posted her opening salvo in the War of Appearances. The image is a meticulously staged high-definition photograph of her living room in Vermont, filtered with a soft, warm glow that hides the peeling paint on her baseboards and the stress lines around her husband's eyes. She is wearing a cream-colored knit sweater that likely cost $300, posing with a forced porcelain smile in front of her monochrome tree while the caption reads, "Quiet, intimate family night, so blessed," accompanied by that sharpened blade of a hashtag immediate family only. It is a digital performance designed to tell the world that she is at peace and that I am a non-entity, an unnecessary variable that she has successfully purged from her perfect equation. She has no idea that less than 2 hours away by flight, I have transformed a 5-bedroom timber frame lodge into a tactical holiday headquarters that vibrates with more life and authentic joy than her silent mansion has seen in a decade. The centerpiece of our great room isn't a fragile $200 hand-blown glass ornament or a trendy rose gold garland. Instead, Draped proudly over the massive fieldstone fireplace is my weathered American flag, the very one that flew over my base in Kandahar during my 2017 deployment. It is stained with the fine red silt of the desert and smells faintly of sun-baked nylon and history, a silent witness to the sacrifices that bought the very freedom my sister uses to exclude me. Beneath that flag, the atmosphere is electric with the sound of 22 guests, my chosen family, who are currently filling the vaulted space with the kind of belly-aching laughter that you can't fake for an Instagram story. The air is thick and intoxicating with the heavy, savory scent of a 20-pound smoked brisket that Dan and a former Army Ranger spent 12 hours monitoring in the professional-grade Traeger grill on the deck. We aren't eating delicate, flavorless appetizers served on bone china. We are preparing to feast on prime rib, garlic mashed potatoes made with real Kerrygold butter, and a spread of roasted vegetables that looks like a harvest painting come to life. I look around the room at my unit. Sergeant Miller, who lost his wife to cancer last spring, is currently showing my old flight school roommate Sarah how to properly muddle blackberries for a round of craft cocktails using a $60 bottle of small-batch Colorado bourbon. Two of my neighbors from the base are engaged in a heated, laughing debate over a board game by the floor-to-ceiling windows, while the fire crackles and pops with the scent of seasoned oak and cedar. There is no tension here, no script to follow, and no fear of saying the wrong thing and ruining the aesthetic. Rebecca is trapped in a 62-degree house, performing for a screen of strangers while drowning in a sea of debt, but I am standing in a $4,200 sanctuary surrounded by people who have actually bled for one another. My sister thinks she won because she got the last word in an email, but as I watch my friends raise their glasses of vintage Silver Oak Cabernet, I realize that she has only succeeded in exiling herself from the only person who would have actually saved her when her house of cards eventually collapses. I am not just hosting a dinner. I am commanding a celebration of the bonds that are forged in fire rather than blood, and the warmth in this room is more real than anything Rebecca will ever post. The digital execution takes place at exactly 1914 on Christmas Eve, a moment when the alpine air outside the Aspen villa has dropped to a bone-chilling 12 degrees, but the interior is a radiant sanctuary of 80-degree warmth and high-proof holiday spirit. My smartphone, resting on a granite countertop next to a half-empty bottle of 2018 Silver Oak Cabernet, begins to vibrate with a call from my mother, and I can almost smell the tension radiating from the other end of the line before I even slide the green icon to answer. I hear my mother's voice first, thin and fragile, whispering about how quiet it is in Vermont and how she feels a heavy guilt for my absence. But then the phone is snatched away with a sharp, audible rustle of expensive cashmere. Rebecca's voice enters the frequency like a shard of ice, smug and dripping with a condescending pity that she has spent 30 years perfecting as she tells me she hopes I am enjoying my quiet day alone and that excluding me was truly for the best of the family aesthetic. She sounds triumphant, convinced that I am sitting in my dark rancher eating a microwave meal in my OCPs, but she has no idea that she is currently bringing a dull knife to a drone strike. I do not raise my voice, I do not offer a single word of protest, and I do not give her the satisfaction of hearing the hurt she expects to find. Instead, I simply tell her to check her text messages and then I end the call with a clinical, military precision. The file I send is a 60-second 4K video shot on my iPhone 15 Pro Max, a stabilized cinematic sweep of the 5,000-square-foot timber lodge that looks like a high-end commercial for a life she can no longer afford. The video opens with a wide shot of the great room where 25 people, my true unit, the survivors, the veterans and the lonely neighbors, are letting out a thunderous, unscripted cheer that rattles the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the moonlit maroon bells. The camera glides over a 30-foot-long banquet table overflowing with $3,000 worth of dry-aged prime rib local artisanal cheeses, and a mountain of gifts wrapped in heavy, expensive forest green foil that puts her rose gold aesthetic to shame. The centerpiece of the footage is the moment I stand before the children of 2 fallen soldiers from my old squadron, my hands steady as I distribute $100 Amazon gift cards tucked into handwritten thank you notes, their faces lighting up with a genuine joy that no staged Instagram filter could ever replicate. I make sure the camera lingers on the $56 bottle bourbon being poured into crystal tumblers and the sight of my husband Dan carving a 20-pound smoked brisket that costs more than Rebecca's overdue heating bill. I can almost picture the scene in that $850,000 Vermont mansion as the video loads on her screen, the blue progress bar acting as a countdown to the total annihilation of her ego. I imagine her standing in her 62-degree living room, surrounded by $200 ornaments and a mountain of credit card debt, watching her uninvited sister host the most exclusive and meaningful gala of the season without her. She thought she was protecting her image by casting me into the outer darkness, but all she did was give me the freedom to build a son of my own. There is no reply to the text, no frantic follow-up call, and no defensive outburst, just a deafening silence from the East Coast that tells me the message was received with maximum impact. I set my phone face down on the counter, the screen finally dark, and I realize that the greatest victory isn't in the revenge itself, but in the fact that I no longer care if she ever speaks to me again. I turn away from the digital ghost of my past and walk back toward the fireplace, back to the laughter of people who actually know my name, leaving the aesthetic of a broken family behind for the reality of a chosen one. Family isn't a blood type or a shared mortgage. It is a tactical alliance of the heart, and tonight my headquarters is full. The fallout of my 60-second digital strike is more explosive than any ordnance I ever monitored from orbit, a chain reaction that systematically dismantles the high-gloss facade Rebecca has spent a decade constructing with predatory credit cards and stolen pride. Within 20 minutes of sending that 4K video, my phone begins to pulsate with a relentless rhythm of haptic feedback, a digital avalanche of blue iMessage bubbles from extended family members who were led to believe I was too busy with military high-readiness drills to attend the family dinner. My Aunt Sarah, who lives in a neat Cape Cod in Hartford, sends a flurry of question marks, demanding to know why she is sitting in a cold kitchen in Vermont eating processed ham when her niece is hosting a tactical gala in a $4,200 Aspen villa. The truth, as it always does in a crisis, begins to leak through the cracks of Rebecca's curated reality like black mold behind designer wallpaper, revealing that her intimate Christmas was nothing more than a desperate smoke screen for a life in total freefall. My mother, finally cornered by the cousins in the kitchen, admits through a tearful voice memo that the reason I was excluded wasn't for peace or quiet, but because Rebecca couldn't afford the $300 catering deposit and was terrified I would see the bright orange foreclosure pending notice currently tucked behind a magnet on her Sub-Zero refrigerator. The realization ripples through the family group chat like a shockwave, turning the #blessed into a mockery as the aunts and cousins see the overflowing banquet table in Aspen and realize I wasn't the one who was unavailable, I was the one who was systematically erased. The messages shift from confusion to a sudden, frantic desire for proximity to my success, with cousins I haven't heard from in 3 years suddenly texting me to ask why they weren't invited to the real party or if there is still room in the 5-bedroom lodge for a late arrival. Rebecca's image as the successful sister, the one with the $850,000 mansion and the custom-blown glass ornaments, shatters under the sheer weight of my snow-covered high-velocity reality. She is sitting in a house that the bank technically owns, surrounded by the silence of a failed consultant husband and a daughter whose tuition is 3 months past due, while I am standing under a desert-worn American flag with 25 heroes who would take a bullet for me. The contrast is a brutal, unyielding metric of character versus currency, and for the first time in 32 years, the family finally sees the difference between the gold plating and the solid steel. I watch the blue dots on my screen dance as Rebecca attempts to type a defense, then stops, then starts again, her digital voice silenced by the undeniable evidence of my $4,200 mountain sanctuary. She wanted to play a game of social exclusion to hide her insolvency, but she forgot that a captain in the Space Force is trained to see through the noise and identify the target with surgical precision. I don't reply to the cousins asking for invites, and I don't engage with the aunts seeking gossip. I simply put my phone on Do Not Disturb and slide it into the pocket of my tactical fleece, choosing instead to focus on the laughter of my unit and the smell of the $1,200 catering spread. My sister is currently drowning in the cold, quiet vacuum of her own making, realizing too late that you cannot uninvite the person who is willing to be your anchor just because you're ashamed of the storm. As the snow continues to fall in thick, heavy flakes against the panoramic windows of the villa, I realize that the greatest victory isn't the social execution of her reputation, but the fact that I am finally, irrevocably free of the need to be accepted by people who only value the aesthetic of love. I have built my own table. The guest list is full of people who actually belong there, and for the first time in my life I don't care what the neighbors in Vermont think about the view. The final, most devastating move of the night is not a digital one, but a silent, physical manifestation of a bridge burned to ash in the freezing mountain air of Aspen. I walk over to the massive fieldstone hearth where the heat of the oak logs is currently radiating a steady, comforting glow of nearly 80 degrees, and I reach into my tactical duffel bag to pull out one last item I brought from our rancher in Colorado Springs. It is a simple classic wool stocking, ivory white with a traditional cable knit pattern that I had originally bought for Rebecca months ago when I still believed we were sisters who shared more than just a strained bloodline and a history of resentment. I take a heavy brass hook and hammer it into the mortar with a single disciplined strike, hanging the stocking at the very end of the line, right next to the one I bought for Dan and the small, embroidered ones we made for the 2 service dogs currently napping by the fire. It hangs there, perfectly flat and hollow, a stark white void against the dark, rugged texture of the stone, looking exactly like the empty promises Rebecca has been feeding our family for a decade. The room is buzzing with the energy of 25 people, the air thick with the smell of the $1,200 prime rib and the expensive, woodsy scent of the $200 diptyque candles I placed on the mantel to complete the atmosphere. One of my guests, a former Air Force Master Sergeant named Elias who has seen enough combat to recognize a psychological operation when he sees one, pauses with a glass of the vintage silver oak in his hand and nods toward the ivory wool. He asks me with a quiet, genuine curiosity who the extra stocking is for, perhaps thinking I was expecting a late arrival or a forgotten friend from the unit who was still driving up the mountain pass. I don't flinch and I don't let a single flicker of anger or bitterness touch my voice. I simply adjust the cuff of my tactical fleece and look at the empty wool with a clinical, detached clarity. I tell him calmly that the stocking is for the sister who believed that family was a restricted, immediate list meant to protect a failing aesthetic rather than an open heart meant to survive a storm. I explain that it is the visual representation of an absence she chose for herself, a placeholder for a woman who would rather stay in a 62-degree house in Vermont with a foreclosure notice than sit at a table of heroes who would have carried her through the insolvency. The silence that follows my explanation isn't awkward. It is a heavy, respectful acknowledgement of a hard truth, the kind of silence that usually follows a final briefing before a high-stakes mission. There is no screaming, no dramatic phone calls, and no more 4K videos sent across the country. There is only the quiet, cold reality of that empty stocking hanging under my desert-worn American flag. It is the ultimate revenge because it demonstrates that while she successfully uninvited me from her table, she unintentionally uninvited herself from my entire life. Rebecca is currently 4 states away, likely scrolling through the comments on her failing Instagram post while the wind rattles her single-pane windows. But I am standing in a $4,200 sanctuary surrounded by the only family that actually matters. I have realized that you cannot fill a stocking for someone who has no room in their soul for anyone but themselves. As the fire crackles and the laughter of my unit swells again to fill the vaulted ceiling of the lodge, I turn my back on the empty white wool and walk toward the people who are actually present, finally understanding that my sister didn't just lose a guest for Christmas. She lost the only person who was ever truly holding the line for her. Family is not a list of names on a birth certificate. It is the person who keeps the fire burning when everyone else has walked away, and tonight my hearth is the only one that is truly warm. The final calculation of this tactical holiday is not measured in the thousands of dollars I spent on the Aspen Lodge or the vintage bottles of silver oak, but in the devastating weight of a missed opportunity that Rebecca will never be able to recoup. I am standing on the heated wraparound deck of the mountain villa, the temperature outside hovering at a brittle 12 degrees while the interior glow of the $2,500 catering spread illuminates the falling snow like diamonds in the dark. My phone vibrates once more, and this time I answer because I know my mother is sitting in that drafty 62-degree Vermont mansion, likely surrounded by the wreckage of a Christmas dinner that feels as hollow as my sister's bank account. My mother's voice is thick with a desperate, stuttering guilt as she tries to mediate a peace that died the moment that 21-word email hit my inbox at Peterson Space Force Base. I let her speak for a moment, listening to the familiar excuses about Rebecca's stress and the pressure of maintaining a certain image in a town where everyone knows your credit score, and then I deliver the financial pivot that effectively ends the war. I speak with the same level clinical tone I used during a high-readiness orbital briefing, informing my mother that before I received that cold rejection, I had actually spent the last 3 weeks preparing a $15,000 interest-free loan to hand-deliver to Rebecca this Christmas. I had the documents drafted, the cashier's check ready in my tactical folder, and a plan to sit her down over a glass of bourbon to tell her that her big sister would never let her lose that $850,000 house to a bank foreclosure. But then I tell my mother the cold, unyielding truth. Since I was deemed not immediate enough to sit at their table or even step foot on their property, I decided that $15,000 was better served as a tribute to the 22 heroes currently laughing and feasting in this mountain sanctuary. I explained that every cent of the money that was supposed to be her financial safety net has been reallocated to provide a world-class holiday for soldiers who have bled for this country and neighbors who have spent the last year in mourning. The silence that follows on the other end of the line is a deafening, absolute vacuum. A void so profound that I can practically hear the realization shattering Rebecca's world in real time as my mother undoubtedly repeats my words to her. In her attempt to exclude me to hide her shame, Rebecca has successfully exiled the only person who possessed both the means and the heart to save her from the looming 30-day bank notice on her fridge. She chose the aesthetic of a quiet, intimate family night over the reality of a sister who has been holding her line for 30 years. And in doing so she has officially bankrupted her future for the sake of a fleeting Instagram hashtag. I am a captain in the United States Space Force, and I have learned that in every engagement, there is a point of no return where the fuel is spent and the trajectory cannot be corrected. Rebecca hit that point at 16:48 when she clicked send on that email, and now she is drifting in the cold dark of her own making without a lifeline. I tell my mother I love her, I tell her to stay warm, and then I disconnect the call with a firm final press of my thumb. I walk back into the great room where the smell of smoked brisket and the warmth of genuine brotherhood wrap around me like a shield, leaving the financial wreckage of my sister's pride behind me in the Colorado frost. Family is not a list of people you can use when the bill comes due. Family is the people who are there before you even have to ask, and tonight my table is full of million-dollar souls who didn't cost me a single cent of my dignity. As the heavy mechanical hands of the grandfather clock in the corner of the Aspen villa move toward 11:45 on this Christmas Eve, I find myself standing alone for a brief moment by the dying embers of a fire that has warmed 25 souls who were never supposed to be here. The room is quiet now, filled only with the soft, rhythmic breathing of 2 retired service dogs and the distant, muffled laughter of my unit finishing a final round of drinks in the game room. But the air still carries the thick aromatic ghost of the smoked brisket and the expensive cedar incense. I look at my reflection in the dark panoramic glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows, seeing not the disgraceful military dropout or the social nuisance that Rebecca tried to paint me as in her 21-word email, but a captain in the United States Space Force who has successfully executed a mission of the heart. I am 32 years old, I have survived 3 combat deployments, and I have finally realized that leadership is not just about coordinating satellite windows or managing million-dollar orbital assets. It is about knowing exactly who is standing in the foxhole with you when the social and financial mercury drops below zero. I look at the empty white stockings still hanging on the fieldstone mantel, a stark and hollow contrast to the vibrant, messy, and loud reality of the people currently sleeping under this roof, and I feel a profound sense of relief that the $15,000 safety net I once held for my sister has been transformed into this sanctuary. My family is not the woman in Vermont who is currently staring at a foreclosure notice while she tries to find the perfect filter for her manufactured loneliness, and it is not the people who share my DNA only to weaponize it as a tool for exclusion and shame. My family is the group of 18 veterans and 7 civilians who received a text message with 2 weeks' notice and drove through a Colorado blizzard because they knew that being together was more important than the aesthetic of a rose gold Christmas. They didn't ask about the menu, they didn't check the square footage of the lodge, and they didn't require a formal invitation written in the cold, clinical language of a coward's email. They simply showed up, bringing their stories, their grief, and their unwavering loyalty to a table that I built with my own hands and my own hard-earned paycheck. Standing here in the dim light of the great room, I am officially inaugurating a new tradition, one that is built on the tactical reality of mutual respect rather than the fragile obligation of a shared surname. I realize now that Rebecca's attempt to phase me out was actually a gift of liberation, a forced ejection from a sinking ship that allowed me to find the solid ground of my own making. I am a leader of heroes, a wife to a man who values a 2018 Toyota Tacoma over an $850,000 lie, and a woman who no longer needs the approval of a sister who views love as a limited resource. As the clock finally strikes midnight, marking the beginning of a Christmas day that I am spending in a $4,200 mountain fortress of my own choosing, I feel the last tether to my sister's manufactured drama snap with a satisfying, silent finality. I am not the uninvited guest. I am the host of a new life where the doors are always open to those who have earned a seat through their actions rather than their bloodline. The fire in the hearth may be fading to a soft orange glow, but the warmth in my chest is a permanent, unyielding flame that no cold email can ever extinguish. Family is who stays when the truth comes out, and tonight I am surrounded by the only truth that matters. The final closure arrives not with a bang or a frantic confrontation, but with the soft, mechanical click of a digital deadbolt being slid into place as I sit in the dim, amber-hued warmth of the Aspen Lodge. The clock has moved past midnight, and the silence of the high Rockies is absolute, broken only by the occasional pop of the dying embers in the massive stone hearth and the steady, rhythmic breathing of my husband Dan beside me. I open my laptop one last time, the glow of the screen reflecting off a heavy crystal tumbler containing 2 fingers of a $90 bottle of Lagavulin 16-year-old single malt scotch, its peaty, smoky aroma grounding me in the present moment. With a steady hand and a heart that has finally stopped racing with the adrenaline of betrayal, I navigate to my settings and enter the email address that sent those 21 words of rejection just a few days ago. I do not type a long, rambling manifesto of my hurt or a list of the ways I have supported her financially and emotionally over the last decade. Instead, I set a firm, tactical boundary that is as unyielding as the permafrost outside. I send a final one-sentence reply stating that while I remain fully available for our mother and her needs, my own door is now officially reserved for immediate friends only, and then I click the block button, watching her name vanish from my digital life with a profound sense of relief. The weight that lifts from my shoulders is physical, a release of tension I have carried since I first put on a uniform and tried to prove my worth to a family that only valued my paycheck and my silence. I take a slow, deliberate sip of the scotch, the liquid heat blooming in my chest as I look out through the panoramic glass at the silver-blue moonlight dancing over the snow-covered peaks of the Maroon Bells. Rebecca is currently trapped in a Vermont mansion that is effectively a tomb of her own pride, surrounded by the mounting debt of her aesthetic fantasies and the crushing silence of a sisterhood she traded for a rose-gold Instagram filter. She wanted a quiet Christmas to hide her failures, and now she has exactly what she asked for, while I am standing in a $4,200 sanctuary of my own making, surrounded by the ghosts of a war I survived and the living reality of a unit that actually knows my soul. I realize now that being the black sheep of a family of pretenders is the highest honor I could have ever earned, and that my seat at their table was never a gift. It was a cage I was paying to stay in. I watch a fresh dusting of snow begin to fall, the flakes spiraling down like tiny, cold diamonds against the dark silhouette of the pines, and I feel a peace that no military promotion or bank balance could ever provide. I have taken my power back by realizing that my value is not subject to her approval and that my presence is a privilege she no longer possesses the currency to afford. I am a captain in the United States Space Force, a leader of heroes, and a woman who has finally learned that family is not a biological sentence, but a tactical choice we make every single day. The empty white stocking on the mantel is no longer a symbol of my loss, but a monument to her absence, a reminder that I am finally free from the burden of carrying a woman who would rather watch me drown than admit her own ship is sinking. As I finish the last of my scotch and prepare to join my true family in the quiet of the mountain night, I find myself wondering how many others have been uninvited by a golden child sibling who feared the light of the truth. I wonder how you took your power back when the people who were supposed to love you tried to phase you out of your own story, because for me, the answer was building a new table and realizing that the view from the top of the Rockies is much clearer when you aren't looking through someone else's distorted lens. My mission is complete, my perimeter is secure, and for the first time in 32 years, I am exactly where I belong.